I'm Tavis Smiley. Delighted to have you in with us in this hour. And in this hour, a conversation about Jews and stolen land, but not the conversation you think. In fact, I almost thought, not just thought, my producers and I yesterday had some back and forth conversation about whether or not to actually cancel this hour. And by cancel, I mean reschedule it in light of what's happening in the Middle East. We spent, as you know, the first part of our program today talking about that. And I didn't want to connect these two things. This book is getting a lot of exposure, a lot of conversation about this book because of the transparency, the courage I think it took Rebecca Claren to tell this story about her own family ought to be celebrated. And I didn't want to run the risk of connecting this story about Jews and stolen land to what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. So I almost thought to cancel it. And then I said, no, I'm going to move forward because I think I can separate these two things, and the audience is bright enough to understand why I wanted to have Rebecca on in the first place. So this conversation is about Rebecca Claren's Jewish ancestors who fled a violent ethnic riot in Russia for the United States and started over in South Dakota. Over the next few decades, her family went on to become a celebrated American immigrant success story. What none of Claren's ancestors ever mentioned, though, was that their land, the foundation for much of their wealth, had been cruelly taken from Native American peoples by the U.S. government. In her book, The Cost of Free Land, Jews, Lakota, and an American Inheritance, she explores the connection between her family's history and the disenfranchisement of the Lakota people. And all things considered, I'm still delighted to have Rebecca Claren on this program. Rebecca, how are you today?
Oh, I'm good. Better being here with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm better for talking to you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the text. As I mentioned, a lot of folk talking about this because we don't often see family members who are so willing to be transparent about their own personal backstories, and particularly one that is as arresting, for lack of a better word, as the story of your family is. So let me just start with a broad question, and we'll move through this hour. And the broad question is really just based on what I said a moment ago, which is where and why and how you decided to be so transparent about the backstory of your family that created all this wealth, but did so on stolen land.
So I've been a journalist for more than 20 years, writing most of that time about the American West. And you don't write about the American West without also covering Native nations. And it wasn't like I had this one aha moment. It actually feels like it took me an embarrassingly long time to connect the dots between the way my immigrant family had benefited from federal land policies at great cost to Native Americans. But during the course of my career, I was hired in like late 2017, I think, to write a series of stories about Native nations and Native American citizens that ran in Indian Country Today and The Nation. And it was while just only working on this series that I just realized, oh my goodness, I can no longer stand on the outside of these stories like journalists are meant to do, and I think for many good reasons, but to report on this as if it has nothing to do with me, to say this is a societal issue, to point out the ways that federal policy of the 20th century still has a legacy today from Native communities. And so it was really, people have asked me, do you feel guilty? And I say, no, I don't feel guilty. I think guilt doesn't really help us in exploring the past and these histories and helping us take responsibility for our part in them. And my Native American friends have told me, your guilt's really unhelpful to us. But I feel a great sense of injustice. And that is and I felt the sense of what any good reporter can recognize is like, this is an important story. This is a story that hasn't been told. And I think, uniquely suited to tell this story because it is both personal and a collective history.
Mm-hmm. I wonder whether we will ever get a true glimpse, and I think glimpse is probably the best we can do, given the question I want to pose to you now. I'm wondering if we'll ever get a true glimpse, much less an expansive view, of the ways in which so many fellow citizens have, in fact, benefited from federal land policy that harmed Native Americans. I just don't think we even see the tip of that iceberg, if you will.
Well, we haven't. I mean, I had an excellent education. I really did. I grew up in Seattle. I went to wonderful schools. I never learned this history in school. Most of us don't. And so until we start to really understand the history and its fuller complexity and nuance of America, I don't think we can start to step for this. But I would actually say, maybe I'm naive, you tell me, I feel far more hopeful than that. I actually feel like my research shows that I'm not the only person out there writing about this. There's wonderful, incredible work that's being done to start to consider the history and also start to step toward how do we reckon with it, how do we reconcile, how do we repair. Certainly, there's not much being done at the federal level, and in that vacuum, it's a harder place. States are sort of, some of them have history curricula that requires their states to teach Native American history. Many, many more do not. And I do think telling the truth and in all its complexity is a very important part. And I think obviously the next step is, well, then what do we do about the truth? And I really grapple with that in the pages of my book. But again, I don't think the fact that we're in a federal vacuum of taking responsibility means that we as individual citizens can't start to ask for that. You know, in Australia, they have a different history, of course, but a history of very much oppressing the Indigenous people of Australia. And again, many years ago, the Australian government wasn't doing anything to acknowledge this history, and it was citizens and nonprofit groups who created these I'm sorry books that they had printed up, put in public spaces. They became so popular of white settlers. Sorry, I know you want to jump in here.
No. I'm only doing it because I'm watching this clock here. I got to do this right quick. But I promise you, when we come forward, I will not cut you off because I want to hear the rest of that. And I do want to take you up on this question you raised as to whether or not I think you are right in terms of being hopeful that the American narrative will start to change, that we will get to a point where we can tell more truth. I'm not so sure I buy that, and I'll unpack my viewpoint on that, and we'll get into it lovingly and respectfully when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Unapologetically progressive. Unapologetically black. You're tapped into Tavis Smiley.
Escalade IQ. This the intro to the all-electric Cadillac perfection like Zoom. And on a full charge, you get 450 miles without the stop haiku. This is what I do. Daddy fat intellect since 92. Linked all the way back, panoramic roof. Come with 24-inch rim standard. Ooh, why? Shawty don't kill him. Cadillac diamond in the back, cold chillin'. And when I'm on attack, on the track is no ceiling. Sky's the limit. You hear me? Straight drop, no parachutes. Lay lines like a longitude and latitude. Feel it, beloved, clearly we're hustling. Bustin', truckin'. Cadillac.
For more on the Escalade IQ, visit Cadillac.com.
Available late 2024. GM estimate 450-mile range. On a full charge based on development testing and/or analytical projection. Consistent with the CHA 1634 revision 2017 MCT. Range subject to change prior to production. Annual rates may vary based on service factors, including ambience temperature, terrain, battery age, and condition loading, and how you use and maintain your vehicle.
For all of us, this generation and the next, there is simply no place in our lives for litter. And yet, it's everywhere we look. And unfortunately, it does belong to all of us. So, let's come together and create a litter-free, clean California, once and for all. Remember to properly dispose of your trash and recycling. Secure truckloads with tarps to keep debris from flying out. Clean out your car when you're at a gas station. Take pride in your community by organizing a cleanup event. Or join a cleanup event near you. Zero litter is the goal. Join us at cleanca.com. That's cleanca.com. Let's do it together. Brought to you by Caltrans. cleanca.com.
In Big Tobacco's Fantasyland, children are the future. Here, tobacco companies are committed to higher education, offering scholarships to students who submit essays about the benefits of vaping. The tobacco industry even sponsors summer camps for kids. Don't worry, the tobacco-sponsored programs have been linked to leaving your kids more interested in smoking. In Big Tobacco's Fantasyland, the world's deadliest industry is your child's friend.
See reality at undo.org.
What's up? I'm Danelle Riley, FAMU alumni and creator of the HBCU Culture Shop. I am so proud of my new partnership with Black Beyond Measure and Target. They help me elevate community pride with my HBCU designs and continue to support Black creators and entrepreneurs with Target HBCU challenges, scholarship programs, and campus collaborations. Let's come together this homecoming season and beyond. Shop my brand and discover other Black-owned products at target.com/blackbeyondmeasure.
Who do you trust to get at the truth?
Tavis Smiley.
That's who. The conversation continues right now.
All right, Rebecca Claren, finish your story. It was a good one. You were making a comparative analysis to the way we treat the American narrative here and our inability, at least up until this point, to tell the whole truth. You were talking about Australia. Finish that point, and then I want to interrogate a couple things.
Okay, I can't wait. Australia, so they had these activists and nonprofits and individuals spread these "I'm sorry" books that were sort of a blank statement of descendants of white settlers apologizing to Indigenous Australians for their treatment. And there was space left for people to make their own personal statement. These were put in public spaces, libraries, town halls, etc. They were so popular, so many people signed them, and they galvanized sort of a groundswell, it seems to me, from what I've read, of response. And the federal government ultimately did issue a response. Are these reactions that Canada and Australia and New Zealand have done to grapple with their complicated history perfect? No, of course not. They deserve great criticism and discussion, but at least they're doing something.
Yeah. I always make a distinction on this program. The audience has heard it more than once. I make a distinction oftentimes between optimism and hope. They're not really the same things. And so I don't see the evidence to be optimistic that we are living in a nation, living in a nation right now where people want to be more truthful, more honest about the real backstory of the American narrative. But I always hold out hope. I am an eternal prisoner of hope. So while I'm not optimistic, I can remain hopeful that things will get better. In this regard, not so sure, Becca Claren. And here's why. We're in a moment where while there are individuals, you are one of them, while there are journalists, you are one of them, who, to use your beautiful phrase, are tired of standing outside of the story when sometimes it requires us to get inside the story. I can appreciate that. While there are individuals doing that, I'm looking at systems and structures. I'm looking at politicians who now want those systems and structures to tell even less truth than we've already been told. Now, you know where I'm going here. I'm talking about book bans and teachers being punished for teaching certain lessons in the classroom. I don't know how much more hold that's going to take across the country. But while on the one hand, there may be a sliver of hope, on the other hand, again, what I'm talking about are systems and structures that seem hell-bent, if you will, on continuing to advance a narrative about the founding and the establishment and, frankly, the expanse and the growth, the success of this country that we all know just not to be true. Does that make sense?
I mean, of course, and I completely see what you're saying, and I agree with it. But that doesn't mean that we all as individuals, I mean, what are we supposed to do? Just say, hold up our hands? I mean, I do think there's an opportunity to at least step towards educating ourselves. I mean, people can they could read my book. They can read many other wonderful books that have been written on this topic. Just because there is a society that's not supporting this doesn't mean we as individuals can't begin to ourselves. So yeah. I completely agree, and I don't want to minimize what you're saying in any way. No. It's a very intractable systemic problem for sure, you know. And I do try and interrogate those systems in my book.
Yeah, we even I said this the other week or so in a different conversation. We even those of us who are educated, those of us who are who ought to know better, although well intentioned we might be, we still continue to advance this notion that America's original sin was slavery. It's just not true. But that narrative has so taken hold and that we continue to repeat it. America's original sin was not slavery. It was what we did to these Native Americans that we're going to talk about in this hour. That was our original sin. But I also think, Rebecca, there is some, I'm trying to find the right word here. There is a particular and peculiar advantage that the nation writ large has by not wanting to tell the truth about the founding of this country. Because the more truth you tell, the more you find yourself in a conversation about reparations and for black people. And the more truth you tell, the more Native Americans start to press their case as if they haven't done that all along anyway. But the more you start to pry open the truth or a way to get at it, the more complicit the country becomes and the more difficult the conversation becomes, if that makes sense to you.
100%. I think that's why you're seeing book bans. That's why you're seeing structural efforts to not teach this history, because that's absolutely true. That's what we're up against here, you and I.
Mm-hmm. Nope, it's formidable. It's formidable when you're trying to get the truth out. When there are folks who don't want that truth to be told because their complicity means that there may be some compensation or other acknowledgement along the way that the country doesn't really want to deal with. So everybody wants to forget the past and just move forward to the future. I digress on that for now. I want to come straight away to your book, The Cost of Free Land, Jews, Lakota, and an American Inheritance. As I said earlier, it's a powerful book. It's rich in its detail about the backstory of your own family. So let me just start with this question. You've been writing about the West for quite some time now, as you said earlier. But when did you come to learn about this particular story relative to your own family?
I mean, I think it was while I was doing that series of stories and starting to realize that, oh, I have benefited. My family benefited from the Homestead Act. I mean, there is incredible research that has shown that as many as like 25% of Americans living today, adult Americans, descend from those who benefited from the Homestead Act, who were homesteaders, who proved up their land. And legal scholars referred to federal efforts to give native land to white or mostly white people as a huge form of affirmative action for white people, you know. And so my family was part of it, but many of us in America today descend from that. And these there's a sociologist Thomas Shapiro out of Brandeis, who said, you know, if you are a person who can own a home, send your kid to college without loans, any kind of inherited wealth that you've got, and you're a homesteader, and you're a descendant of homesteaders, it's probably because your family got that free land. So it's related to that, and a lot of us are there.
Yep. What do you make of this irony? And for me, I think irony is probably the best word at the moment. The irony that there are so many millions of fellow citizens who, when the issue of reparations comes up, will say, I didn't own any slaves, so why should I be forced to pay? I didn't benefit from slavery, so why should I be forced to use my taxpayer dollars to fund reparations? I didn't benefit from it. And yet, to your point, there are about 25% of Americans, mostly white folk, obviously, who benefited from the Homestead Act. I'm putting it nicely, benefited from land that was stolen from Native Americans. But that conversation never gets off the ground. They don't want to be responsible for reparations, but at the same time, they don't want to acknowledge that they benefited from the Homestead Act. How do you read that irony?
Well, we're humans. Humans make mistakes all the time, and it's uncomfortable to take responsibility. And early on in my process, I'm going to get back to your question. I'm going to loop around.
Sure.
But early on, before this was even a book proposal or a book, I was just starting to think about this. I was very fortunate to get to be sent to write a profile of Judge Abby Abenanti, who is the Chief Justice of the Yurok Nation of Northern California, and she was also a state superior court judge for most of her career for California. She's an incredible person. She runs her courtroom in the Yurok Nation with a real eye to traditional culture and justice. And the way traditional justice was done for the Yurok, and she's become a model for how to run a courtroom with real empathy for people all over, judges all over the country. And anyway, she said to me, we started to talk about my ideas about this book, and she said, if you're going to try and write this entangled history, you need to study the Jews. You have to study your own culture. What does your culture say about how to respond to a harm, even one you maybe didn't directly commit, but one you've benefited from?
Mm-hmm.
And that sent me on several years of study I did with my rabbi here in Portland, who I'm part of a congregation that's very committed to social justice. And he right away was like, yeah, this learning is important for all of us. And he gave me so much of his time, and we spent several years looking at ancient Jewish texts and also looking at contemporary rabbis in America today who are looking to these old Jewish texts for inspiration on how to respond to what at least one rabbi says are the twin original sins of this country, both the taking and stealing of native land and the enslaving of people. And two things I think are relevant to your question around that, and that are guiding at least my response to this truth that so many people are saying, this wasn't me, I have nothing to do with it. One ancient story is, it's in Deuteronomy, and there's a story of when you find a dead body in the road and you can't figure out, it was a murdered person, and you cannot figure out who murdered this person. These ancient pre-Israelite societies being described in Deuteronomy did not say, oh, I guess there's nothing to be done. There was an acknowledgement that leaving sin and murder unaccounted pollutes the entire community. And so the people in the nearest towns would literally measure their distance to this dead body, and whoever was closest to the body had to take responsibility for it. And that meant there was like a bloody, ritual involving a heifer, not something we would do today, but it had an economic impact to those people. And there was the sense that sin is collective and must be borne collectively. And Rabbi Tavis Smiley, who wrote an incredible sermon based on this teaching, she said, how do we today, living in America, measure our distance to these foundational sins? And I would say, Margaret Jacobs.
That's rich.
It's rich,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And Margaret Jacobs wrote this incredible book called After 100 Winters. And she makes this, she's a professor and leads the Great Plains department at the University of Nebraska. And she would say, she says, no matter when you came to America, you are benefiting from stolen land. It is the foundation of our highway systems. The breaking of treaties is how so many of our cities were created. There are so many examples, which I lay out in the book, specific examples. And clearly, in my opinion, I, as the descendant of homesteaders, my distance to that harm is much closer than someone maybe who arrived on a slave, whose ancestors came against their will on slave ships, or someone who arrived in America last week. But we all benefit. And starting to consider our proximity to this, I think, is a really important first step. There's one other story. I don't know if you want me to go there.
No, go.
Okay, so there's this other incredible teaching that comes from the Talmud, which is another ancient text. And it describes this debate between two rabbis, that what do you do if it's discovered that a house or even a palace was built with a stolen beam in its foundation? And one rabbi says, well, you have to tear the whole house down and give the beam back to who it was stolen from. And the other rabbi says, well, no, you can keep the palace or the house standing, but you have to compensate whoever it was stolen from. Both rabbis make it clear that as soon as you understand that the beam was stolen, those living in the house have to take responsibility. They have to do something about it. And Sharon Brous, who's an incredible rabbi in LA at ECAR, she wrote in a somewhat famous, especially among Jewish circles, sermon in 2017, she wrote, our country was founded on a stolen beam. So my book grapples with how does my own family start to take responsibility for our piece, our very small piece, but a piece of this stolen beam.
We are talking about proximity and stolen beams, and all of that matters to the story that you're going to hear when we come forward. Her name is Rebecca Claren, and she's speaking with great clarity in this dialogue. The book is called The Cost of Free Land, Jews, Lakota, and an American Inheritance. And in the book, she tells the story of her Jewish ancestors who fled a violent ethnic riot in Odessa, in Russia, for the U.S. They start over in South Dakota. They build a significant amount of wealth, but they do it on stolen land. And that story never comes out until Rebecca Claren does the research to write this book, The Cost of Free Land. You heard her, again, with these two great stories about the Talmage and Deuteronomy, talk about proximity and stolen beams, and all of us have some responsibility, it seems to me, to accept the truth in both of those stories. But we'll get to her story about her family when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
This is getting good. Yeah, man. Tavis Smiley continues when we come forward.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Thank you for joining us on this Monday morning here at the Black Information Network. I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest. Attorney General Merrick Garland is opening up a federal hate crimes investigation into the death of a child. The 6-year-old Chicago, Illinois boy was stabbed over a dozen times on Saturday. His mother was also injured in the attack that authorities say was carried out by the family's landlord. He's now charged with first-degree murder, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, and 2 counts of a hate crime. United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain is looking to gain control over what's perceived as the rebellion against the union's bureaucracy. Saturday, Fain visited with Mack truck workers in Pennsylvania and Maryland. This a week after Mack truck workers rejected the proposed sellout offer for thousands of employees. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Still seeing a top as you travel in Diamond Bar. This is going to be on our 57 north as you get towards that 60. The right lane is what's blocked with a crash. Coming away from Pathfinder, the busy drive. Compton, Paramount, mentioned this earlier, stalled Big Rig. It's on the 710 south. South 710 just past Alondra onto the right shoulder. So right around Firestone Boulevard is where you're ordered off the brakes. Headed to Arleta, Pacoima, taking the 5 north. Approaching Van Nuys is where we do have a collision onto the right shoulder. That is slowed the drive there from Osborne Street. Echo Park on the 101 south at Glendale Boulevard Union. 3 middle lanes blocked with a crash for slow from Sunset. And on the 101 north into Hollywood at Sunset, stalled vehicle onto the right shoulder here. That's busy to drive from Vermont.
Wendy's new breakfast 2 for $3 Biggie Bundles lets you choose from your fave 4, including a sausage or egg and cheese biscuit, small seasoned potatoes, or medium hot coffee. Limited time only during breakfast hours. U.S. price and participation may vary. Not valid in a combo. Single item at regular price.
Hi, I'm Kyle at Blindster.com. Shopping for new blinds? At Blindster, we offer over 50 different blinds, shades, and shutters at low prices, custom made for your windows, and shipping is free. Shop at home and order 10 free samples of any product before you buy. Blindster.com.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Rams ran over the Arizona Cardinals. Running back Kyron Williams had 158 yards rushing. 154 of those came in the second half. Williams had one of the Rams' 2 touchdowns. The Rams are 3-3. The 2-2 Chargers are in action tonight at SoFi against the Dallas Cowboys. 5:15 kickoff on ESPN. No more undefeated teams in the NFL. The last 2 went down yesterday. Philadelphia lost to the New York Jets. The Eagles were shut out in the second half. The 49ers missed a field goal in the final seconds at Cleveland. They lose by 2. LeBron James and Austin Reeves did not play last night in the Lakers' preseason loss to Milwaukee at Crypto.com. First game together for Milwaukee stars Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard. They played the first half and combined for 31 points. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Ray Richardson, your sports connection here at KBLA Talk 1580. Join me and my co-host Neil Scarborough every Saturday night at 7 for Out of Bounds, the show that brings some flavor to the world of sports for 60 minutes. We take you beyond the scores and press conferences. We give you our point of view, the way black folks see what's going down. You can join the conversation and give us your analysis at 1-800-920-1580. Out of Bounds every Saturday night at 7 on KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
You like the style, though.
At Susan G. Komen, we believe that ending breast cancer needs all of us working together. Because if you've just been diagnosed and don't know where to turn, we've got you. If you can't afford the treatment you need, we've got you. And if you are driven to honor the loved one you've just lost, we have a place for you here. Because of you, we're supporting those who need help today while tirelessly searching for tomorrow's cures. Visit Komen.org and be a part of our Susan G. Komen community today.
As veterans, we're no strangers to helping others.
That's what we were taught, service before self.
But we do have one question for the veterans listening.
When was the last time you reached out for help?
If you or someone you know needs resources, whether it's for stress, finances, employment, or mental health, don't wait. Reach out.
Find more information at va.gov/reach. That's va.gov/reach.
Brought to you by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the Ad Council.
The Green Foundation, key health influencer, empowering our black communities through action. The Green Foundation advocates for affordable health care, accessibility, and knows the importance of culturally relatable health care. Regardless of income, we believe it is a right for optimum health. The Green Foundation has been at the forefront for 25 years, dedicated solely to promoting prevention through early detection, annual screenings, and nutrition. We know you because we are you. Our hand-holding approach supports you and your family to receive your right to be treated fairly and receiving quality healthcare services. We want you and your family to know COVID-19 was devastating to our families and to our wallet. We can build back better by understanding prevention, wearing your mask, washing your hands, social distancing, and understanding the impact of long COVID. Get the care you deserve. Take advantage of your privileges. Contact us, info@thegreenfoundation.net. info@thegreenfoundation.net.
Smart talk for curious people just like you. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
You're listening to Tavis Smiley and Rebecca Claren, author of the book The Cost of Free Land, Jews, Lakota, and an American Inheritance. Rebecca, take me now straightway inside the book. Tell me about your family.
Well, that's a big question. Can you give me a little bit more? Tell me what you want to know about my family, because I wrote about them for many, many pages.
No,
so
I understand.
Tell me what
I understand. That was my shorthand way of saying I want to get specific to the story of your family coming here and settling on this land in South Dakota that we later learned was stolen land.
Yes, awesome. So I start my book not in America but in Russia, because to me, I think I've really spent my whole career thinking about how does policies by governments play out in the lives of real people. And you see, so to start it here would be to miss the ripples of what was happening in Russia around the turn of the 1900s. And what was happening there is that my family, being Jewish, was incredibly oppressed. My great-great-grandfather, as you mentioned, was in this horrible pogrom where he was beaten to within an inch of his life. He suffered what I think probably were the effects of a traumatic brain injury from then on. His behavior was described by his children in letters that I read and in interviews other family members did with some of those people as being very erratic throughout his life. And my family, though, like many, many, many other Jews who were living in what was called the Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe, a place where most Jews could not own land, where their jobs, what jobs they could have, were incredibly restricted, and where their lives were often in just regular danger, they flee to America, and they come to America, and many of them are coming to very overcrowded cities on the East Coast, and there's this effort by Jews, actually, to say, let's get these people out of the cities and into the rest of these more open places. And it was an easy thing to do because at that same time, politicians were wanting to fill the prairie with white homesteaders. Part of the reason for that is there was this effort to connect a rail line from California and all of its natural resources to East Coast cities, and they'd realized that the best way to fund that rail line was lots of little traffic along the line, so lots of little people, and lots of people living in small communities along a railroad line. So that's part of why the United States eradicates and decimates the American buffalo, and why they break its promises to Native people so many times in so many years, in a few short span of years, and push them onto reservations where, at the time my family comes to South Dakota, if you were Lakota living on a reservation, even though the closest Lakota reservation to where my family ends up settling was only 13 miles away, they did not interact very often with their Lakota neighbors, which was completely intentional, because you were not allowed, if you were Lakota, and this was true for Native people all over, to leave a reservation without permission, without a pass from the Indian agents, which were sort of basically like the mayor of the reservation, but they were appointed by the federal government. So my family comes to South Dakota. I think they had no idea what they were getting themselves into. They had lived, the stories are that they had lived in, quote, one of the nicest houses in Kapulia, which was the shtetl my family lived in an area that is today Belarus. And they come to the plains, and they are living initially in a sod house, which is, if your listeners don't know, it's a house that's cut into the cut bank of the hill, and they were dirty and smelly. When it rained through the roof, which was only the dirt above you. Their lives were very hard. There's stories that a cousin told me of his dad, who was a child on the prairie, clearing a path of rattlesnakes every morning from the house out to the outhouse, and he was 5 years old when he's doing that. They struggled. They worked very hard. They incurred incredible drought. They were very, very tough. And this narrative of the hardship, it runs parallel to a narrative that this was, as my great-grandmother and her sister called it, the good earth. They felt American because they owned land. They felt free because they owned land. And they were sort of able, historians have done research that shows that sort of Jews were able, and other immigrants were able, to shake off their suspect immigrant status by becoming homesteaders, by owning land. It was a quick way to metabolize their sort of upness and look like they belonged. And so for my family, this was a very important psychological thing to own land. It also, based on my research, looks like it was an incredibly important economic tool. So I pulled every single deed on my family's land that we owned in South Dakota, and I pulled then every mortgage that my family got on that land. Because, stories are wonderful, but how do you get data, which is, as you know, like the scaffolding on which good journalism and stories hang. And so I wanted to see, could I really see the impact? And what I found was these mortgages were, I think, very, very important in building my family's wealth. An economist that I interviewed said it's really important that you don't just look at, like, how much did your family get for the land when they sold it, which was in mostly 1965, and then the last bit was sold in 1970. Because these little bits of money they got on the value of the land throughout time helps them build their wealth. So you see, my family doesn't throw anything away. And so in boxes in people's houses where other people might keep like food and coats, we have old letters and photographs and receipts and tax returns from 1911. And I was able, because of that, to really have this incredible trove of original research. And when you compare the dates on those mortgages to things people are writing in letters, you see They would get a mortgage out. They would move away. They would get a mortgage out. They'd start another business that wasn't contingent on weather.
Mm-hmm.
And even, of course, they had to pay that money back. But it was this incredible tool of really American capitalism, right? So my family is on the prairie. There were all these incredible stories about their lives there that we heard, what I call in the book our greatest hits.
Mm-hmm.
But we never really had any stories about our Native neighbors, although there were photographs that were very mysterious. I grew up very interested in these pictures of my relatives standing next to men dressed in Native garb and war bonnets. There's one photograph that was very important to the story that I'm telling. It's my great-great-uncle Jack, and he's shaking hands with a man who's, in my family, he's wearing, like, full Lakota regalia, and he was always described in my family as Chief Red Cloud. And the first trip I took for the research for this book to the Dakotas in early 2019, tribal historians looked at this photo and they said, yeah, that's definitely not Red Cloud, but it looks like Joseph Whitebull. And Joseph Whitebull was a very important person in his own right. His uncle was Sitting Bull, and there was an entire book written about him called Warpath in the 30s. And through friends and sources I had in the Lakota community, I got connected to Doug Whitebull, who is a veteran teacher and beloved coach, and he's retired now. But the first day I met him, he said to me, "I am the oldest living descendant of Joseph Whitebull." And so this story is told not only in the specifics of my family history, but I'm so grateful and honored that Doug and I have spent hours and hours talking, and it's a lot about his family's Lakota story as well.
Yeah, there's that's a lot. That's a lot to take in about the relationship or lack thereof, depending how one looks at it, between your family and these Lakota. And yet, what comes through in this book is that wealth that your family built was built on stolen land. No other way to look at it. And I want to interrogate that part of the story when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
JP Morgan Chase is building on the investments in California and around the country to help close the racial wealth gap and build a more equitable future. As part of JP Morgan Chase commitment, they are taking action to help improve financial wealth and access to banking in the Black community, helping more people open low-cost checking and savings accounts, hosting community seminars with supporting Black-led institutions by building awareness about financial investments, hiring community managers, and opening community center branches like Crenshaw, Inglewood, and downtown LA. Visit today, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Again, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Get the tools to help reach your financial goals. Visit today, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Again, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity.
We're celebrating 1 year of the K. From checking out the vibrant art and diverse dining in Leimert Park to cheering on your favorite team in Inglewood, you can choose your own adventure when you ride the Metro K-Line. Leave the car at home and go Metro. Visit metro.net/K-Line.
Only 1 in 5 people with autism are employed, despite many having the skill set and desire to work.
Maybe it's because employers don't know what kind of jobs they can do. Like, what about a programmer?
That's a job for someone with autism.
How about a healthcare worker?
Yep, That is too. People with autism can do a lot of different jobs, but often get overlooked due to outdated stigmas. Introducing WIN by Autism Speaks. We help businesses lead the way in inclusive hiring.
What about a ranch hand?
To learn more, go to autismspeaks.org/win.
Let's get back to more of Tavis Smiley right now.
We're talking with Rebecca Claren about, how might I put it, historical realities. We're talking about how we approach dealing with uncomfortable truths about the past, how we then can move forward toward healing wounds and wrongs that have been unaddressed for quite a while. And we're talking about the wealth that her family built over a period of time in South Dakota, but having done so on stolen land. I'm just watching my clock here, Rebecca, and I'm wondering how I, or moreover, how you address that duality, if you will.
Well, after all the years of studying I did of Jewish texts, and after many, many conversations with Lakota elders, with Doug Whitebull and his family, I was compelled to consider how I and my family might take responsibility. I think it's really easy to have a hot take.
Mm-hmm.
If I just sort of bottom line, here's what my family's doing, I think it's really easy probably to respond to that in a way and not take it in. And I'm not trying to be dismissive, but I am just here to say I came to this personal decision with incredible sense of the nuance and complexity and really weaving it together. And so I guess I am just saying, I think each of us need to look at our own traditions and or I would like it. My favorite feedback on the book so far is when people read it and they say, this was about your family, but it sure made me think about my own.
Mm-hmm.
And in the back of the book, I do have resources for further research that if you feel compelled after reading this book to think about what we talked about, your distance to this, and start to learn more about it. It's by no means a definitive list, but it is the resources that were very helpful to me when I was beginning my research, and I share them there, hoping that they help other people start to excavate their own histories and find themselves in this story.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really important first step.
Yep. When you hear people say that they can situate their own humanity, or the lack of humanity, for that matter, of their own families in your story, that makes you feel how?
It makes me feel like I didn't work for 5 years on a book project for my own vanity. I mean, I guess I feel delighted that, we started this conversation about optimism versus hope.
Mm-hmm.
You don't write a book this challenging. I mean, all books are hard, I think, but this was a very hard book to write. And I was compelled to keep going at many places that were very difficult out of the hope, let's call it, that it would resonate with people. And so it's gratifying. Will it reach everyone? No, of course not. And that's okay. But I'm grateful that you're helping spread the word about it, because I really believe it's important.
No, I think the salient point in this conversation for me, there have been many, but the primary point for me in this conversation is for us to consider the proximity, as you put it, that many of us have to these historical realities, and that, again, many of us are the beneficiaries of stolen beams. I'm still holding on to those 2 points. We'll wrap our conversation with Rebecca Claren when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
You're listening to Tavis Smiley. Tavis Smiley. Ranked number 45 on the Heavy 100 list of the 100 most important radio talk show hosts in America.
What's up, party people? It's your favorite MC's favorite rapper, MC Light here. And we're celebrating 50 years of hip-hop, authentically powered by Cadillac. And we're going to take it way back to where it started. It was only fitting that hip-hop began with teenagers at a back-to-school jam in the rec room of a South Bronx apartment complex by an 18-year-old brother. By the way, I'm also sure he had a Cadillac parked outside. He noticed the energy on the dance floor when he switched between 2 turntables, extending the beats, repeating the breaks, and never losing the rhythms. And that was the birth of hip-hop. And from that moment, it took off.
For more on how Cadillac is celebrating hip-hop's 50th, visit Cadillac.com/audacity.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. South Central Youth Empowered Through Action is the youth component of the impactful CBO, known as the Community Coalition. South Central Youth Empowered Through Action has chapters at almost every South LA high school. Say Yeah, as they are popularly known, is located at 80th and Vermont, but serves young people all over South LA. Under the COCO umbrella, they train youth organizers, help underserved scholars prepare for college, and work with students to help them gain admission to top universities. South Central Youth Empowered Through Action fosters teen activism, where young people have led campaigns moving tens of millions of dollars to South LA schools and forcing officials to make AP classes available to students in under-resourced institutions. SCES scholars have taken part in the March on Washington, been published in major news outlets, and been elected to city council. Long before she was mayor, Karen Bass started the program when she founded the Community Coalition. To donate, volunteer, or enroll a student in South Central Youth Empowered Through Action, please visit cocsouthla.org. cocsouthla.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Hey there, Los Angeles. This is James Lucky Jr., publisher and editor of Los Angeles News Observer. Are you hungry for news that matters to you in the African-American communities of Los Angeles? Well, buckle up, because we got the scoop you've been craving. Stay in the know and never miss a beat with our free weekly publications conveniently available near you. Or hop on the digital wave and become an exclusive subscriber at OGNSC.com. Don't forget to join the party on Instagram and Twitter at OGNSCINC for behind-the-scenes access and sizzling updates. No more FOMO. Let's stay informed, connected, and empowered together.
He's rooting for everybody black. Everybody black. More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
Rebecca Claren, I am curious as to what the writing of this book and the wrestling with your own family history has taught you about, and I don't want to color this any more than I'm asking it unapologetically and deliberately broad. What have you learned about truth and justice, courtesy of writing this text?
Oh my God. Oh, it's such a huge question. I mean, I think one of the things I've learned that feels very relevant to me in this moment is that we can hold two things at once. That it's possible to have been oppressed and to be part of an oppressive system. It is possible. Certain families and members of mine have really, I did things differently than I have in the past as a journalist for magazines, and that a year ago when this book was, many drafts done, but not typeset, shared it with members of my family. And I also shared it with the White Bull family. I actually read it over the phone to Doug because he's blind at this point. I wanted him to make sure I was representing his stories with accuracy. And it was hard. It's been hard for some members of my family to see our ancestors in all their complexity, to really grapple with what I say in the book is sort of the white spaces around the edges of the stories we've been told. This book started with these questions of what are the stories we tell and what are the stories we don't tell in families and in nations. But I would say what's been amazing is that members of my family who can say, this is so hard, and we are so proud of you, and we love you so much. My Aunt Etta recently, right before Yom Kippur, wrote me this note. She's 90 years old, and she said, thank you for helping me be more of a realist at the age of 90. And I think, to me, that's so amazing. And like, if she, at 90 years old, can have her mind expanded, even though this is so personal, it gives me, let's use that word again, hope. It gives me hope for the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, again, my takeaway from this conversation and from this book is that Americans writ large would do well to start to consider their own proximity and their complicity, frankly, to systems and structures that have been at the epicenter of injustices for many of our fellow citizens, and to recognize, again, as you said earlier, that so many of our fellow citizens are living in structures where there are stolen beams. I'll leave it there for now. The book is called The Cost of Free Land, Jews, Lakota, and then American Inheritance is written by Rebecca Claren, who I've been honored to have on this program for this hour. Rebecca, thanks for the conversation. Congrats on the book, and all the best to you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Great talking.
Good to have you on. Hour 3 of Tavis Smiley, when we come forward.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mike Moore. Now here's the latest from the Black Information Network. President Biden is sending condolences to the family of a young Chicago, Illinois boy killed in what's being called a hate crime. The 6-year-old was stabbed over 24 times on Saturday. His mother was also injured in the attack that authorities say was carried out by the family's landlord.